大家好，我叫崔毅，我是9312号，很高兴这一次硅谷峰会做共同主席，和大家一起 organize 这个 event。Ladies and gentlemen, dear USTC alumni, dear friends, it's my great honor to kick off tonight's reception. This Technology Summit, based on USTC alumni, has been planned for about a year or so, and this is the first time we have USTC Silicon Valley Technology Summit. This is a very exciting event. So in order to kick off this whole event, we have this reception tonight. Before I start the formal program tonight, I would like to acknowledge our dinner sponsor for 100 people here, and it's Li Xiaojun, 8810。罗宁一771的罗宁一，还有是陈氏828的。非常感谢。It's a great honor. We were able to invite Professor Stephen Chu to give the keynote speech tonight. It's a great honor, and for me to do such an introduction. Steve is my dear colleague, collaborator, and also a mentor at Stanford University. So everybody knows Steve. Let me repeat a few achievements he has done for the whole world. And Steve got his bachelor degree at University of Rochester. After that, he went to UC Berkeley, getting his PhD in physics. After getting PhD, he spent a short time at Lawrence Berkeley Lab and moved on to Bell Lab. That was the time he started his Nobel Prize winning work on laser cooling. In 1997, he was awarded Nobel Prize for this work. And in 1987, he moved to Stanford to become a professor of physics. And he kept doing innovation, not only in atomic physics. He also started to do work in biophysics at a single molecule level. So he's well known in using optical method to study the single polymer chain, the single biomolecules. In 2004, he took on another challenge. He moved to Lawrence Berkeley Lab as the director. I was lucky to have very short overlap with him. I was still a postdoc in Lawrence Berkeley Lab and also using the Berkeley campus. And also during that time, I could see the whole Berkeley campus become the most vibrant place for doing energy research. That also influenced me quite a bit. After I joined Stanford faculty in 2005, I basically didn't do anything I proposed to Stanford. I got a startup package and started to work on energy. Steve has a strong influence on my decisions, what research topic to work on. So shortly after his directorship at Lawrence Berkeley Lab, in 2009, when Obama became the President of the United States, he nominated Steve to become the Secretary of Energy. So he was the first person to become a first scientist to be in the cabinet of the United States. I also forgot to mention, he's also the first Chinese faculty in the science areas at Stanford University. So he really struck a number of firsts. In 2013, he stepped down from a Secretary of Energy position and come back to Stanford, continue doing research. now not only doing research in biophysics, but also working on research now in materials and energy. And I was fortunate to have him as a collaborator on the battery research, on the water research, on the air filtration research. And a couple of years ago, and clearly, solving environmental problems is so important, particularly from China. The air pollution. Steve and I created his first company, my second company, and doing air filtration. Even though he's not a USTC alumni, he developed a few really great scientists. Professor Zhuang Xiaowei, everybody knows, and Professor Cui Bianxiao. They are all Steve's. They were all Steve's postdocs. Xiaowei now is at Harvard, and Bianxiao is now at Stanford Chemistry as a tenure faculty. I, as a UST's alumni, also benefit a lot by collaborating with Steve. And I believe Pei Dongyang sitting right there, and has numerous collaborations with Steve when Steve was in UC Berkeley and Lawrence Berkeley lab. So when I invited Steve to come to this dinner reception, he accepted right away. I think he has also deep connection he feels with USTC. With this long introduction, Steve, I will hand the podium to you and tell us about what's exciting for the next many decades to come. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here, and when he asked me to come, I did say yes. I did not know, so he owes me twice this week for getting me to talk. Once on Thursday, but I am delighted, and as he noted, I've had several postdocs, Xiaowei Tong at Harvard and Bianxiao at Stanford, in my group. He was not in my group. I wish he was, but I wasn't in material science. But I also have a current postdoc in my group. And so the only reason he is not in my group was he's wrong sex.
It's too late to change.
No, it's not too late to change. In any case, but I think your wife won't want you to change. I'm going to talk about things I really care about, the risks of climate change, very briefly, new data, but how science and technology can really make a big difference. And I'm going to incorporate a lot of the work I'm doing with Yi, and if I have time, I'll just march through, tell you a little bit about some part of the stuff I'm doing, not in Yi's group. So I'm kind of joining Yi's group. So the risks of climate change are that from 1880 to 2016, this is the world average temperature. And if you notice this, what's really alarming, people talk about since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, but really it's been since 1970, 1975 till now that the lion's share, 80% of the temperature increase has occurred. When I was in Washington, D.C., the politicians made a big deal about from here to here. They said, look, the temperature's not increasing. And it was amazing. During the whole time, our Secretary of Energy said, no, it's not increasing. What are you talking about? So I knew I walked into an alternate universe. In any case, it is increasing. We didn't predict that there would be a slight leveling. But over a 20-year period, the predictions have been amazingly accurate. All right. So that's a problem. And you can ask, are the glaciers melting as the sea level rising? And the short answer is yes. There is alarming satellite data that suggests that there's alarming satellite data that suggests that Antarctica, which was predicted to gain in ice in the recent history because hotter temperatures, more evaporation, more snow. Snow doesn't melt. And so what was particularly scary was Antarctica was not gaining ice, and balance, it was losing ice consistently, which is counter to the prediction. So the climate guys got it wrong. It's much worse than they thought. But also, I should remind you that if you look back in history, the last warm period, which is only now less than 1 degree warmer than where we are today, and the UN goal, the sea levels were much higher. How high? They were 6 to 9 meters higher, not centimeters. But we used to think that that would take thousands of years, and if it took thousands of years, there would be a long evolution, things could happen. And now what we're seeing by the very rapid melts in Greenland and Antarctica is that we think maybe 5 meters in less than 100 years. Very, very different. And so this is the Pudong area of Shanghai, and 5 meters is not going to be good for this area. In fact, if you look at all the map of Shanghai and surrounding cities, including my father's hometown, which came over here, this is where the sea level is today. And if we achieve the UN goal, this is what goes underwater. Okay? But the UN goal was hopefully 1,000 years, but now it doesn't look like it's going to be 1,000 years. So there are 30 million people in Shanghai. If you come around the existing suburbs and everything, easily 16 million people. Okay. They get displaced very, very rapidly. What counts with cumulative emissions, because once you stick the carbon dioxide in the air, 45% of it stays up there for many thousands of years. Much of it gets immediately absorbed by the trees, the oceans, very quickly. So it's all automatically accounted for as we go up. So luckily, the Earth tries to respond and absorb the carbon dioxide. The oceans, roughly half. The oceans, because they're absorbing more carbon dioxide, have become more acidic, about 30% more acidic than 100 years ago. So this is not a small fact. And if it gets too acidic, then a lot of the balance in the ocean is at risk. So now, the UN goal was 450 parts per million of CO2. If you include the equivalent parts per million of not only CO2, but methane and hydrofluorocarbons, anything, we're at 490 already. Okay? So, just so you know, we're past the UN goal. The climate people already know this. If you look at what's going on here, if we just stay at the same rate, if the rate does not increase, just stay at the same rate, we pass the UN mark in 20 years. And so I think we're not only going to go over 450, which we're over, we're going to go over 550, and I think we're going to probably go over 600. Okay, so that's the bad news. Famous Latte said, if you don't change direction, you will end up where you're heading. And again, this last 3/4, it's now 4/5, occurred in the last 65 years. Okay, so again, don't be lulled into thinking, oh, it's since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. That might have started in 1850 or 1800. No, all the stuff has been done since 1950, 1960. Okay, all right. So how is science and technology making a world-class difference? I might also add, not appreciated by most people, that if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture and land use, including grazing, the amount of greenhouse emissions from agricultural land use equals the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from electricity generated in the world. The same. Completely ignored for the most part. And there is lots of low-hanging fruit in this, in changing the biology and the farming practices. And my latest thing is to try to raise awareness and also try to get some very serious studies going on in agriculture and land use. All right. Okay, so wind and solar energy, very briefly. I don't expect you to read the tables, but let me just summarize it. According to an independent analysis, a financial analysis in 2016, unsubsidized prices in wind and solar in the United States are now comparable to electricity generation from the current cheapest source, which is natural gas. So there's one assumption that's important. If you build a natural gas plant today, that natural gas plant will run for 50 years. What will be the price of natural gas over that 50-year lifetime? And what they did is they took a price that historically is much lower than what it has been in the last 50 years. And they're saying we're going to have a lot of natural gas, cheap natural gas, for 10 or 20 years for sure. So they actually assumed a very, very historically low price of natural gas. But it's a guess. Okay, the price of wind and solar actually is kind of free. So it's mostly the capital expense of wind and solar, and for wind, some maintenance costs. Okay? So what you find is this is natural gas, this is the price range, this is wind, that's solar. Very, very exciting. But there's a but here. That's if wind and solar are 3%, 5%, 10% of the total US supply. Wind is replacing hydroelectric as more electricity generated and used from wind than hydropower in the United States, which is 6.5%. So wind is passing hydro right now. Solar, we think in the next 5 years, will get up to 5 or 6% as well, because the price has come down only in the last 3 or 4 years to 1/3 of what it was 4 years ago. Okay? Very, very exciting. But so right now in many places in the United States and other places around the world, the so-called average cost for the time we made this investment is already 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That is cheaper than the general wholesale price in the United States by a lot. It's 1/2 to almost 1/3 of the wholesale price in Europe. So the cost of electricity in the United States is absolutely some of the cheapest in the world. There are a few countries like Norway and Iceland that are cheaper, but that's it. Okay, and the expectation is that these costs will continue to plunge 2 cents a kilowatt hour by 2030. I'm on the Shell Science Advisory Council that reports to the highest vice presidents and very most directly into the CEO. And Shell actually expects the cost of electricity by 2030 to 2040 will be 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's an oil company saying this is what's happening. Okay, now if this is what's happening, you need a much smarter system to actually take that electricity, which doesn't turn on when you want it to. It turns on when the wind blows and the sun shines. And you need to do energy storage. You have to have layered monitoring. You have to figure out how to do demand-side management, which is if things are really bad, you have to throttle back usage a little. The same technology can do outage detection and management, and there are technologies that can actually send the electricity exactly where you want it. It's just like information packets on the internet, rather than sticking it on the lines and letting it just trickle down like plumbing. Okay, so we have this technology, but mostly we need to apply what's called machine learning to actually use all of these things and to predict much more accurately the weather and learn patterns. So, but this is very possible. Let me talk about energy storage. This is my favorite picture of energy storage, which we use for several hundred years. When the wind blows, you use the energy to pump water. When you want the water, you open a valve. We forgot how to do this. We have to relearn that when the wind blows, the sunshine, pumping water is by far the cheapest way to store energy. But let me tell you about what you think of energy storage, and this has to do with electric vehicles. In the first years when electric vehicles just emerged, which is about 2005, the price of manufacturing batteries was enormous. And it has gone down from roughly $1,200 or $1,300 over here to, well, we're now here, and at this point in 2017, we're somewhere around 200, maybe 250, but let's say $200 per kilowatt hour. Tesla claims that when the Gigafactory reaches full production, they will be at $150 a kilowatt hour. Actually, Elon Musk said 3 or 4 years ago they will reach full production here, and they'll be at $125. And so I applied the Elon Musk factor, moved the time back 2 years, and the price up a little bit. But other than that, I think he will actually achieve this. But it's more than that. Where we are in batteries, different types of batteries. And Yi, and with a little help and convincing from me, are trying to target something over here. We want commercial batteries for electric vehicles to be over here. Once you get it over here, the show will be over. That means a car that weighs as much as an internal combustion engine, 1.5 to 2 liter engine with plus transmission, will weigh the same as an electric vehicle. And a very compact car like a Prius can go the distance of a long-range Prius. So this is what we're expecting will happen now. It will require, I'll be candid, some breakthroughs. Half the breakthroughs are actually there already. You need another fraction of the breakthroughs. Very great progress on the anode. The cathode also signs of great progress. And safety will increase, cost will plummet. Okay? All right. So this is the growth expectation made in 2016 of the growth of batteries. This is the expectation made 1 year later by the same outfit, not a different place. Okay, so there are rewriting the book, just as the growth in solar energy in the last 2 or 3 years is completely rewritten because of cost. The progress in batteries expectation is going to be completely rewritten. So the question is, why is that? So let me remind you of another big change in technology that occurred at the beginning of the 20th century. And this had to do with the replacement of horse and buggy and carriages. New York in the 1890s were all horse and buggy and walking, to major cities in maybe 25 years. Complete change. Horses gone. You have either electric trolleys or streetcars or and gasoline. And so, of course, you can say, you know, the automobile technology proved to be superior, but it required a very, very different infrastructure. It required an oil, gasoline supply chain. It required service stations. It required better paved roads. It required lots of stuff. So why did it change so fast? This is one of the fastest technological changes we have witnessed in the last hundreds of years. And the reason, of course, was that there was also something else driving that. And that was a serious pollution issue. And what was the issue? The issue was, in 1880 in New York, there were 160,000 horses. And there was a lot of horse poop. There was that's a technical term that physicists use, 3 to 4 million pounds of horse manure were produced each day. And so it was literally on every street, and little young kids would have a little entrepreneurial business, and they would sweep the road so the well-heeled, wealthy people can walk across the street without getting ankle deep in horse manure. There was also 400,000 gallons of horse urine produced every day. Okay, so it was pollution that really pushed this. All right, let's talk about pollution. This is Beijing and a bad air day. Not a pretty sight. But what we have discovered only in the last 5 or 10 years, really very recently, is 2 forms of pollution have been equally bad. One is particulate matter, especially the smallest particulate matter, PM2.5, far smaller than 2.5 microns. And the other is the nitrogen oxides, only in the last 5 or 10 years. And then all of a sudden, we're in a different space. And The largest studies this is the largest study I know, but there are many more that are continuing even larger studies. And I'll tell you the bottom line. And the average air quality in Beijing in 2016, the average air quality is such that it's as if you're smoking more than one package of cigarettes a day, except everybody smokes from day zero. Okay. And all the parents who are raising their kids notice that many of their children have asthma, serious respiratory illnesses. They begin to notice their grandparents are really cleaning their eye. Very, very dangerous. Okay, so as we make more, but this finding was consistent with all the previous studies. Okay. So he has discovered something fantastic in his laboratory. He found that a very fine nano diameter, 100 to 150, 200 nanometer diameter polymer fibers could be very good at trapping PM2.5. In fact, when you're so fine, you can actually see 50, even 30% of the light through. There's no resistance to air, and yet you're capturing a transmission of 30%. You're trapping about 98% plus of the PM2.5. So this is a big deal, because usually if you want to trap these finest particles, you have to have a very thick mass that has a lot of air resistance. There are particles, and so as he mentioned, he twisted my arm to start a company. And the reason I was willing to do this, you know, there's 8 companies that came out of my group. I didn't want to be part of it because I was concentrating on research all those years. But the reason I'm willing to do this is because it is so important to get this technology out as fast as possible. So anyway. Just to let you know, this is an independent test by an investigator. If you're at 220 parts per million, the N95, which is actually supposed to trap 95% of all particles greater than 0.3 microns, doesn't do quite that well. It gets about 28%. So that's much like smoking one, a quarter of a pack a day. Okay, so you actually want better filter material, and this new material will be good enough to can actually be used in screens in homes. The schools don't have any high filtration systems, so a very big deal. How does it work? It's kind of cool. It's like how you pick up fine particles with static electricity. The electric field polarizes this particle as a neutral particle, and because the field is a little stronger than here, this is attractive, that's repulsive, but the particle goes to the fiber. But because it's a nanofiber, the fields are much stronger and works best with the lightest particles. You told me about this discovery, and I said, yeah, I think I know what it is. So what is it? It's static electricity. It's this. This is how do you know that? I said, because this is what I got my Nobel Prize for. I used electric fields of a laser to attract atoms and other particles to the central focus. Okay, except this is using these nanofibers to attract it to the fiber. They hit the fiber, they use chemistry to keep it stuck. So it's great. Okay, so now think about cheap electricity, 2 cents a kilowatt hour. It's a new world. It used to be 5-6 cents a kilowatt hour. And so instead of wasting electricity, can you use electrochemistry to do something useful? And so I'm going to talk about 2 things that I'm very happy to be adding to what he's doing. One is the lithium. This is the price of lithium July 2013 to 2016. This is the price that's going up, it's going down. And there's, of course, market trading. This is what actually gets delivered, so this is a lot of speculation. But the point here is that it's really increased by a factor of 4. And this is before EVs have really taken hold. EVs are less than 0.5% of all the cars being sold today, in 2017. So when electric vehicles become very much better in the next 5 and then for sure 10 years, this price is going to go crazy. Okay? So this is a picture of Changwu. I don't think she's the USCC. Okay. So she is leading the charge on how you can put in seawater, this blue stuff, in an electric field. You can attract it to a cathode, like a battery. And then afterwards, when you charge up this material, in the material over here, you flush out the seawater, you put in fresh water, you reverse the potential, and it goes back into fresh water. There are some really cool tricks. First it was done for uranium, but now we're doing it for lithium. And what we're finding is not only is a pulse field, but if you actually reverse the field a little bit, you get much better selectivity. Very exciting because you start with seawater at 180 parts per billion. And so the fractional volume is 1 in 18,000. And after one cycle, we get 1 in 1. And then what we find out is that's seawater, but if the water is 10 times more salty, of all salts, the ratio of lithium to sodium changes, and then you get 95%, and if it's 100 times, you get more than 99%. What's really exciting about that is in many oil wells around the world, you drill, like in Texas, Oklahoma, you get 1 barrel of oil, and you get 5 to 10 barrels of salty water. And what was causing all the earthquakes was pumping the salty water back. But they were trying to not cut corners, but they were trying to save money, so they put it back in only a few wells. And you have to spread it out. So I'm beginning to tell the oil companies like Shell, you know, guess what? That salt water that you're pulling out of the ground, you could be making hundreds of millions, billions of dollars by taking out the lithium. Okay? So I've asked them to give us a sample of it so we can see how good that is. We've already got a sample of salt water from the Salt Lakes in Utah, and Chong is doing that. So very, very exciting that this may work. And again, if it works, the sources of lithium increase around the world by 10,000. But most important, the price of lithium won't go screaming up. Already the finance people around the world and the equity guys are maneuvering to get portions of the lithium mining because they say, hey, we know what's going to happen, and so it's like most money men, they want to make money by kind of cornering the market. Okay, so I hope as technologists they fail. Nothing would make me happier. Okay, so another thing I want to talk about is some exciting work led by Jun Yi in Yi's lab. And it's something where she wants to create what's called an artificial lung. So what does a lung do? You inhale, and you inhale a bunch of air, and what you also inhale is some oxygen in the air. And it goes through all these tubes, from your throat, the bronchial tubes, all the way down into smaller and smaller pipes. Eventually it gets to get these tiny little chambers that are only 200 microns in diameter, okay, 0.2 of a millimeter. And in this, some remarkable stuff happens. The oxygen diffuses from this air sac into the blood, and it's carried by the blood with a protein called hemoglobin into your cells. And it's all about gradients. You have higher oxygen in your lungs than in the blood, higher oxygen in the blood than in the cells, so it just kind of flows in that direction. Meanwhile, your cells are churning up, or burning up energy, and as a waste product, they're creating CO2. Another protein called carbonic anhydrase serves the purpose of hemoglobin for oxygen. It absorbs the CO2 from the cells, it gets piped in, it goes to this boundary, and because of the gradient, the CO2 in your cells is higher than the CO2s in your blood, which is higher than CO2s in your lungs, it just automatically diffuses out. And it uses these exquisite, beautiful biological proteins to make the transfer, okay? So Jun says, why don't we imitate that and make electrochemistry that looks kind of like a lung? So now you have a little bag, except it's not a living bag, it's a plastic bag made of really cheap polymer with little itty bitty holes in it. And the other thing about the lung that I didn't tell you about is the membrane of this lung allows the blood to not, or water not to penetrate. It allows the gases to go back and forth, but the blood stays where it is. Similarly, this little polystyrene, plastic bag has little holes. They're not that little. They're 20, 50, 100 nanometers. Allows the gas to diffuse in, but it keeps the water out. So we're going to do electrochemistry. You still need water in the electrochemistry, okay? But the old way of doing electrochemistry is you got to dissolve the gases in the water, limited solubility. Then you got to move water, which has huge resistance, and then you make the gases, and then the energy required to make a bubble is another down, and then you got to get the gas out. So she says, why not imitate nature, get the gas in, get it into the water gas interface, do the electrochemistry, and get out in the gas, and all of a sudden you're moving gas, not liquid. Resistance is way down. And then you can have a piping system that goes from big ducts to smaller ducts to smaller ducts to the lung, if you're alive, okay? And then back out again in continuous flow. And all of a sudden you can do electrochemistry in 3 dimensions, okay? So I think this might be a very big deal. It will revolutionize the way you think of doing electrochemistry, right? It's moving water and mass around that is so expensive. And so at lithium, at $20 a kilogram, it's easy to do well. To get CO2 into hydrogen carbon monoxide, you got to be really cheap. And if you look at electrochemistry, it's the size of the electrochemical plant that's the showstopper. So the science is working diligently on better catalysts, better lower over-potential, earth-abundant catalysts. It's the size that really matters in the end. And so I didn't appreciate that until I became Secretary of Energy. Okay, so again, I go around the world telling nanobiologists, chemists, and everybody else, focus on the whole picture. Okay, so also very exciting. This is how you can make both carbon monoxide and hydrogen, very high ratios, good stuff. And I promise you, within a few weeks, I will. I think we want to rewrite the paper the way I just described it, right? So because
okay all the time.
Yeah, but it doesn't, because the appreciation of how many new things it is takes a while. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about some stuff not done with E. There's life after E for me. And this is some work of 3 members of the group. We are, as he mentioned, synthesizing nanoparticles ourselves. We've learned how to do it. There are 3 members of the group doing it. They're very good at it. I think we make some of the best, if not the world's best nanoparticles now. This is the core, this is the shell. And what makes it the best? Well, this is the brightness of your standard nanoparticles you might buy commercially. And we're up here. And at low intensities, we're about 600 times better. So it's a good start. When I first got interested in this area, I was reading the papers, and I thought we would be here because that's what the papers said, and much to my surprise, they were not there. I think there's a very good group at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. There's now my group. There's about 4 or 5 other groups that are very trustworthy, and most of the others are not. But there's a realization you can make much better particles. Because we're making it ourselves, we can explore parameter space in a much deeper way, and finding out that the standard what did I do? The standard concentrations were not ideal, which is fine. On that slide, present the view. Should be okay. Okay, good. All right, anyway, that's all good. We've also learned how to put coatings on the particles so that you can biologically tag them. This is work by Sam Peng, and he's now down to 2 nanometer thicknesses. Very exciting, because you want the particles to stick to the proteins and cells you want, but you don't want them to stick to anything else. And without coating, they stick all over the place, and with coatings, we have an upper limit of nobody sticking onto a glass surface anymore, peg glass surface. We're doing this with cells. We now have about 7 or 8 to 1. Anything else on the cell and the proteins we want to target. We think we can get this approximately 50 to 1 because we don't have enough tags on the cells. But let me just show you something. I'm going to go through that. This is a picture of these nanoparticles inside a cell, a live cell. And you see the little dot here, it's just walking back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is actually raw data. It's not enhanced data. It's not, and the signal to noise is what you see. Okay? And oh, by the way, we can watch for minutes because they don't photo bleach. And so as the particles get brighter, we can do even more. This is a cool thing. This is now on the surface membrane of a cell. And it's moving back and forth, and it jumps quickly and goes over here, then jumps over here, then it goes over here. And so what we're seeing is proteins diffusing around the cell, but it's not real diffusion. They seem to be going to specific locations, spending a lot of time there, going to another location, spending a lot of time there. Again, we can watch for minutes. So what we find is gas jumps, they stay here, their resolution is 15 nanometers, where they're stuck. Then they go, and so most of the time they're not moving, okay, and then little times and stuff. So again, this is a new capability. Very exciting because we have other strategies. Other people doing this as well, but we have some tricks to use dye to send light in, excite the dye transfers to the rare earth goes this beautiful signal to noise. And we are going to be trying some tricks so the dyes last for a very, very long time. So in 3 or 4 months we'll know whether this is going to work. But if we can get this, we can get another 100 times brighter particle, which means we can go smaller and we can use less light. So again, that's fun. We are also finding we can simultaneously use these very small particles in an electron microscope. That's the optical signal, that's the electron microscope signal, so the resolution you see is what you get. And we're so far about 100 times better than everyone else, and we're hoping to be 1,000 times better because there are, again, slow improvements and little tweaks and understanding the physics of why the other stuff was not so bright. So again, and that's done. Why do we want to do this? This is an electron microscope we stained, and these are our particles. And so we want to simultaneously see an electron microscope and a bunch of different proteins and where they are. So that's also being done. I'm going to conclude by just saying, returning back to environmental issues, both local air pollution and the global air pollution of CO2, that this is a very big deal. You probably saw, many of you might have seen these pictures in the New York Times, I think it was the New York Times, of Elon Musk saying, we can have cities on Mars. I don't know, how many have seen that? It was either Wall Street Journal or New York Times, it was today. Okay. Okay, so here's what is not in the fine print. There was no fine print. On the way to Mars, you're outside the magnetic field of the Earth, and the cosmic rays will give you a lethal dose of radiation. You might take a few years to die of the cancer, but you're going to get a lethal dose. Okay? Point 1. Point 2, there's not much water on Mars, at least on the surface, and there's really very little air on Mars. So other than that, it's exactly like going into the New World. You land on a boat, you can grow plants, you can do all sorts of stuff, you can breathe the air. So aside from not breathing the air and no water and nothing to grow, it's the same. And the lethal dose of radiation. So I have to remind people that this is the moon, also not a good place to live. That's a wonderful place to live, especially if you can afford the Bay Area. And look, all black, nowhere else to go. And so the astronaut who took the picture said, we came all this way to explore the moon. The most important thing is we discovered the Earth. And what we discovered by these pictures is how precious the Earth is. And that we have changed the climate of the Earth, and we're going in a very bad direction. I think there's still time to reverse that. but we need all the technology, all the science. And you notice I've got now three women from USDC. So you can send boys, men and women, to me. I'm equal gender. And it just turned out, as you probably noticed, that six of the people we're talking about are women.
Yeah.
That turn out to be spectacular scientists as well. Thank you.
I'm sure our alumni will have some questions for you. This is a great opportunity to ask Steve. He touched upon many topics. Feel free to ask about anything. Question. We probably don't have enough microphone. Can you stand up, introduce yourself, in which class, and yell very loud?
My name is Victor Wan, class 776. Thank you for a great talk. Clearly, climate change has been consensus in the scientist circle. But the current administration denies climate change. I'm wondering what kind of scientists they're talking to, or they don't talk to scientists.
I'm not sure they're talking to very many scientists. I don't think Scott Pruitt is a scientist. I know the Secretary of Energy is not a scientist. That's a very good question. If you look at the contrast between the United States and China, where actually all the past presidents in the recent past were all engineers, the number of engineers at the highest levels of the government here is actually what it should be. And so China knows what's going on. Okay. Actually, the scientists in the oil and gas companies know what's going on. And many of the oil and gas companies know they have to move in this direction. They know they have a half a century or more to make this switch. And others are still trying to use politics and pretend nothing's happening. Okay. But the other thing about this administration is they are wanting to shut down all climate research. They pretend we don't really know for sure, but I think they know. And they don't want more news that confirms where we're heading and what's going on. And the last 5 years of climate data, not models, are mostly, it's worse than we thought. So it becomes even more important to shut it down. And you can guess why they might want to do that, but in any case, that is also going on. Okay, so it's a very different administration. So I'm hoping, I know all the European oil companies are trying to make this thing. They're calling for a real price on carbon. I know ExxonMobil, at least publicly, is doing this. I'm hoping that ExxonMobil, and now that Chevron has a new CEO, if I can get I'm going to be meeting all the oil executives in January this year at Oslo. It's a closed meeting, and I hope I can convince them, look, you're not going out of business for the next 50 or 60 years. You're part of the solution, and it's really important to try to convince them. Otherwise, all the politicians say, oh no, we don't want to go against, coal's different. Coal has problems. It's not part of the solution. So, anyway, it's economically driven.
There's another question, I think, right there.
And I'll be very brief in my next answers.
This is Huawen Wu, Alumni 97, Physics Department. Thank you, Dr. Chu, for the very inspiring talk. Actually, many years ago, I was lucky enough sitting in your lecture at UC Davis talking about biomass energy. Partially inspired me joining Sandia Labs using your laser traps to looking at microalgae for its oil production. But another reason, of course, your DOE also pays postdocs nicely. So unfortunately, I didn't hear you talking about biomass energy today. Is it less sexy technology at this point, or is this because the crude oil right now is too cheap?
Well, that's a very good question. First of all, crude oil is very cheap. And we were trying to do something that might be competitive with oil at $100 a barrel. And at $40, $50 a barrel, it looks very, very difficult. Nevertheless, there is some really great stuff going on very recently. A combination of robotic biology, being able to have massive data cells to transfect many organisms, plus machine learning. And so I'm on board of a company where we're using this technology, massive transfection of microbes. And what we found is when you twiddle everything and you take the human hand out of that, what you can do is actually develop microbes that are much better than a decade or even longer of the normal biochemistry type of programming. Now, in addition, so we think there's a huge thing in that, and then as many of you know, there's a new genetic editing thing called CRISPR-Cas system with a protein, and it allows you to stick exactly what you want to the letter of the genetic code, where you want it, into a microbe. And so this company is now merging with it, buying a company that has 100,000 CRISPR-Cas through proteins, which you can't explore unless you had a robotic, high-throughput machine learning. Okay, so very, very exciting. And then very recently, I talked to another member of my group, Steve Quake, and also the former Dean of Arts and Sciences and a plant biologist, Sharon Long. He said, okay, you've got all this technology happening. We are now being able to understand the microbes in the gut and how the microbes in the gut not only help us digest, they actually help our immune system, an integral part of our immune system, and even cognitive ability. And so we're getting new science that can understand those microbes in a way that we couldn't 5 years ago. The same technology you can use to understand the microbes in the soil, thousands of microbes in the soil, and the synergistic relationship with the plants and the microbes. And there are actually microbes in the roots of plants as well. So again, new science, very, very exciting opportunity to make agriculture much more productive and stick carbon back in the soil. The amount of carbon sequestration, there's a deal we reported on this, the amount of carbon you can stick in the soil by using better agricultural practices, which we've been reaching out for since agriculture began, is staggering. So again, higher productivity for the farmers. You put carbon back in the soil, you're growing better, more food with less, in a natural way, natural meaning that you're using all the relationships, but you understand it better. Okay, so I think, now the hardest part is $40 to $50 oil. but there's still this huge progress happening in genetics at the microbial plant and human level. So very excited about that.
We'll get a lady a chance first. We have two gentlemen now. We have a lady asking a question.
Hi, Ricky Son. I actually went to grad school in STC, business school. But as a matter of fact, my graduate thesis was about warmer winter in China, as well as how to use green finance to help China on the global warming issues. So as you said earlier, you talked about a lot of energies that either Dr. Cui's lab is doing or your lab is doing, including how to track the PM2.5, how to generate batteries. So the question is that when you said there is still a chance to reverse it, it's not just pollution, right, on the particle here. It's also the carbon dioxide. How do you reverse that? What are the new technology promising things that are happening?
Yeah. So given the fact, great question, since I say we're going to go over 550, probably 600 parts per million. Once it's up there, it stays up there for tens of thousands of years. Okay, so how do you reverse it? Well, first, there's the first law of holes. If you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. That means you stop the immediate pollution from electricity, from agriculture, from all this other stuff, cement, steel, or plastics production. The second thing is you're going to have to grab it out of the atmosphere. you will have 100 or 200 years before the sea levels really, you know, if we're going where I think we're going, we're not talking 6 or 9 meters. We're talking 15, 20 meters. Okay? By the way, more than 10% of the population lives within 10 meters of sea level. Okay, so the amount of climate refugees is not a few million, it's, you know, billions, a couple billion. So we need to grab the carbon dioxide out of the air. We need to mineralize it, to put it in, let's say, concrete or something like that, building material that's sequestered. We're not sure sequestering a lot of it in saline aquifers, you know, there's going to be public wariness about this. So the best thing is carbon recycling. And so that's why taking CO2 and making it into useful materials is so important, because now you're recycling, and now you're taking carbon out of the air and you're putting, you know, Shell's dream, one of their big dreams, can you take carbon dioxide from oil refineries, from the air, from power plants, and use it to make structural building materials that compete with steel and concrete. That's really great carbon sequestration, because you've eliminated huge carbon sources, and once you put it in there, it ain't going to go back in the atmosphere. So that's a technical dream. We don't have the technology to do that at the moment. But these are the sort of things that I hope that young, brilliant people, Peidong, am I allowed to call you young? Yi, young, and their students and postdocs, and my students and postdocs, are the ones who will probably figure out how to do this stuff. But we need really brilliant people to do it. So you're absolutely right. We're past the point of saying, oh, if we stop now, everything's going to be okay. Right? We're already past the UN target.
I think I know you all want to ask questions. However, we are running a little bit late, and everybody is getting hungry. You need to charge up to get energy for yourself as well.
Starting with biofuel.
Yeah, some biofuel. Well, thank you, Steve. I have a gift to present to you. Next year, 2018.
Oh yes, I forgot.
Yeah.
You guys are going to be 60 years old next year.
Yeah.
I will say that forever I will be older than you. Well, until something happens to me. But I also have to say that based on the graduates I know coming out of USTC, it very quickly catapulted to the best universities I've seen in China. Not by the normal metrics of status and this and that, but by the graduates. And the graduates who come out of a place actually speak louder than all the other stuff, in my opinion. So.
Send you a gift from USTC.
So I've never been there, but someday. Right. Thank you very much.
Now we can serve dinner. And after dinner, we still have time to hang around here and to do networking. So I hope you use this opportunity to interact with each other, to also ask Steve more questions. Okay, let's begin dinner.